further ado, I'm going to ask Venkatesh Rao, the blogger from Ribbon Farm, to give us a flash of genius. Venkatesh.
So I was really happy with the pessimistic start that the day had because I don't believe in happiness. And then it got all optimistic and inspirational, and for parts of it, I wanted to blow my brains out. So I view my job as bringing balance back to the universe, and I'm going to start by using PowerPoint, so that should depress a lot of you. OK. So I'm going to start with this very tragic view of the workplace, which is Hugh MacLeod's cartoon company hierarchy. And I read it this way. At the top, you've got your sociopaths, who are the manipulative jerks who get most of the rewards. In the middle, you've got your sincere, hardworking people who believe fervently in every vision and have absolutely no clue how the world really works. And at the bottom, you've got your disengaged and checked out losers who know they're getting a raw deal but don't want to take risks and do anything about it, so they check out, do the bare minimum possible, and try to live their lives on weekends and evenings, right? So that's the company hierarchy. And when I first saw this, I immediately saw it as extremely accurate, and I started trying to figure out what makes this picture emerge. And I started applying like the obvious candidates, which would be ideas about how promotions happen. So I applied Peter's principle, which says that eventually everybody rises to their level of incompetence in a hierarchy. And that didn't work out. Then I tried Scott Adams' Dilbert principle, which says that the most incompetent people are elevated to middle management, where they can be put out of harm's way and do as little damage as possible. That didn't work. So a few weeks later, I was watching reruns of The Office, and then it sort of came to me. Turns out there's really two promotion principles going on, not one. The first is that the sociopaths at the top, they promote the overperforming losers to the middle, because if the people at the bottom are overperforming, it means they don't know they're getting a raw deal, and they're clueless, and they make for good pawns in the middle. And the second principle is that they also look for people who are underperforming, doing less than the bare minimum, but are looking for shortcuts to the top and taking risks. So normally, underperformance at the bottom will get you fired, but if you are visibly taking risks and looking for shortcuts, you'll get on the sociopath's radar, and that's going to take you on the fast track to the top. So I was pretty happy with this idea, and I labeled it the Gervais principle after Ricky Gervais, the creator of the show The Office, and I blogged it. And then all hell broke loose. The post got picked up by a whole bunch of aggregators, including Slashdot and other major ones. I started getting tons of traffic. I got like 30,000 visits in a couple of days, and it crashed my website. Hundreds of comments, tons of email. I had retirees emailing me, telling me for the first time my career makes sense to me. I had students fresh out of college, new workers, telling me that, hey, you've inspired me to not work so hard and start being a bare minimum loser, and I'm looking for my way out. And I had not just corporations, I had people emailing me from the startup world, the military, churches, the government, all telling me that you've completely accurately described our organization. So I started wondering, is this just a lucky internet hit for me, or is there something deeper going on? And I started really looking into the history of such tragic and pessimistic views in management. And it turns out that this is a pretty strong and continuous line of management philosophy that goes back over 100 years. And before that, you get the same line of tragic thinking in 19th century military philosophy, which is where modern management philosophy grew out from. And before that, Before that, you can trace the origins of this kind of tragic and idealist dichotomy to the origins of political science to about 1648, after the Peace of Westphalia, when the first modern states were emerging. And these two guys are very important in those two narratives. And I'm using the word narrative here to annoy Tyler Cohen, who's going to be coming up next, because he hates narratives. But OK, both of them proposed really influential narratives about how institutions and civil society emerge from pre-political states. And I'm going to oversimplify a shelf full of political science for you and say that for Hobbes, the fundamental axiom is that humans are evil, naturally, and for Rousseau, the fundamental axiom is that humans are naturally good. This is called the tragic idealist dichotomy in political science. And it has been very influential. It has been adapted and made much more sophisticated over the following centuries. And you've now achieved a sort of balance of power between idealist and tragic in politics. But when you look into management, which inherited this dichotomy, things played out very differently. And in management, this dichotomy was first explicitly stated by Douglas MacGregor, who made up the terms theory X and theory Y. So again, oversimplifying, theory X, if you believe people are evil and manage according to that philosophy, you're a theory X person. If you believe that people are fundamentally good and managed by that philosophy, you're a theory Y person. And to pick a couple of famous names, Abraham Maslow is classic theory Y. He's kind of the Rousseau of management. And William White, who wrote The Organization Man, is classic theory X. He's kind of the Hobbes of management. And if you look at the history of management philosophy through this X versus Y lens, the story becomes really simple. Between the Gilded Age of the robber barons and World War II, theory X kind of dominated. And then between World War II, or just after, and the end of the Cold War, theory Y dominated. So it was a big oscillation, right? Now, personally, I kind of think the most fertile place to be is when there's a dynamic tension and a dialectic between these, well, good and evil sides of management philosophy. I tend a little bit towards Hobbes, so I call my philosophy Be Slightly Evil. And I actually have an email newsletter with that title, Be Slightly Evil, and that's my little joke at Google's expense. And I try to bring that philosophy to all my writing because, to me, that's where I find the most interesting ideas coming out. So my blog, my book, all of them, I try to approach it with this balanced good-evil dichotomy in mind. And that brings me to the flash of genius I'm supposed to offer you, which is, if you look at what has happened since 1990, the big oscillation between X and Y has sort of slowed down, and you're starting to see the emergence of a true balance of power, as you see in politics, between the Hobbesian people are fundamentally evil approach and the Rousseau-ish people are fundamentally good approach. And to me, that's really the most healthy place to be. Thank you.
Well, thank you. One question for you before you leave the stage.
Sure.
I mean, was that the British version of The Office or the American version of The Office that you...
I watched both, but the thesis is much more fully developed in the American version simply because it's run over 7 seasons. So they've had the time to work out that narrative arc to its logical conclusion.
It's interesting because in the British version, I mean, the manager is just completely objectionable. Whereas in the American version, you kind of end up quite liking them.
Well, that's the American fondness for the redemptive tale and happy ending. But
now, does that have any relation to the real world of work?
It actually does. Like this principle, I spotted it actually in little pieces, little episodes of the American version, and you see hints of it in the British version, but it doesn't get fully developed. But yeah, you see a lot of other shows like Mad Men, Deadwood, a lot of. Actually, I would say that 90% of management writing nonfiction in the last 20 years has been very theory Y and idealist, whereas most of fiction or television or movies about this stuff has been very theory X and tragic. And I believe fiction much more than nonfiction, so that's me.
Well, thank you very much. That was great.